Earth has just been visited by the perfect solar storm.
The sun kicked up this just incredible solar flare and a massive amount of energy headed towards Earth.
Not only was this storm one of the two most powerful on record, it was also one of the fastest. Ejecting from a sunspot aimed directly at Earth, it raced from the sun to our planet in less than 18 hours.
Now it takes a really fast rocket ship years to get to the sun. This storm, this cloud of electrified particles, managed to get here in less than a day. That's incredibly fast.
Fortunately, the perfect solar storm took place in 1859, when the only technology vulnerable to the onslaught was the telegraph. Since the era in which we have become dependent on high technology, we've yet to see another perfect solar storm. The question remains, could it happen again?
What if we have another one like that? Can we have another perfect storm? Well, I'd say yes, we can. There's no doubt about that. The effects that would be on us today compared to 1859 could be devastating.
The effects on Earth and on our communication systems, we don't exactly know. That's the scary part.
It's likely that our modern technologies would be battered like beachfront houses during a hurricane. Imagine if we lost all the satellites that relay cell phone calls, television signals, and bank transactions. And what if at the same time, the failure of power grids cascaded whole regions into darkness for hours or weeks? If these essential services couldn't be restored quickly, chaos wouldn't be far behind.
It would definitely be a ripple effect upon society and every man and woman and child that lives on this earth.
Earth's magnetic field, which acts as our protective shield in space, has a hole in it. And that could put a lot of our earthly functions at risk. Dr. Michio Kaku, professor and author of the book Physics of the Impossible, is back with us. Professor, how are you? And good morning to you.
Glad to be on the show.
Thanks. Twice in 1 week, man. It's bonus hour. What is this solar shield?
Well, every 11 years, the sun has a temper tantrum. It releases a shock wave, a tsunami of radiation that could wipe out communication, weather satellites, GPS, spy satellites, you name it, it's up there in outer space.
So you're saying that my BlackBerry won't work?
The internet, Fox, television, cable, satellite TV, all of it could get wiped out around 2012. That's when we have the peak of the sunspot cycle. That's when the sun's magnetic field flips. North Pole and South Pole flip, releasing a shock wave of radiation, which will then hit the Earth minutes later, potentially wiping out a good chunk of our satellite communications. We're watching it very carefully now.
Well, Doc, this happens how often, you say?
Every 11 years.
Well, why an 11-year cycle?
It takes 11 years for the magnetic field of the sun to build up enough intensity to begin the flip process, because it slowly revolves in a circle. It's like winding up the windings of a clock. If you wind up the mainspring of a clock too much, it boing, comes out of control. Same thing with the sun's magnetic field. It literally flips every 11 years, releasing a shock wave of radiation. And that means we have to start to think about reinforcing our satellites, building redundant systems, because it means that GPS, the power grid, weather satellites, communication satellites, satellite television, all of that could get disrupted, peaking around 2012.
So your point is we can't do anything about it in space, but we can do something back here on Earth.
That's right.
But backup systems, are companies really doing that?
Well, they're going to have to do it because, see, we scientists made a mistake. We thought that the next cycle was going to be quiet. Well, some of our data was off by a factor of 20, and that's why we're issuing this alert now. We made a mistake. The next cycle, peaking around 2012, will be much more serious than we previously thought. Now, in the past, we dodged the bullet because we didn't have that many satellites up there 11, 22 years ago. Back in 1990, we didn't have that many space satellites.
Well, that makes sense to me. But, you know, I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking, why 2K? I'm thinking it's just a tactic to put a lot of fear in a lot of people. It may have gotten us ready, but there was really no danger in the end.
Well, let's hope that it's a dud.
When talking about this morning, we all kind of agreed it has that Y2K feeling, like it could happen, but if it doesn't, we're going to spend a lot of money for nothing.
Well, we had a wake-up call just 2 weeks ago, giant auroras, northern lights as far as Michigan and Wisconsin, and that's a warm-up for 2012-2013, when we hit the sunspot cycle. Every 11 years, the North Pole and the South Pole of the sun flip, releasing a burst of radiation. But every 100 years or so, a monster tsunami from the sun emerges. In 1859, we had a gigantic solar storm which knocked out telegraph wires back then, 150 years ago. Yeah. If that had happened today, it would knock out almost all our satellites, knock out power stations. There would be food riots around the country because refrigeration would stop. Airplanes would probably crash without radar. It would paralyze the planet Earth. $2 trillion in property damage. And again, this is a once-in-a-century, once-in-2-century storm. The last one was 1859. But we do have them, and we have to worry about them. That's what we have to worry about. We physicists have been telling Congress we have to reinforce our power stations. We have to have redundancy in our telecommunication systems, our satellites. Several of our satellites apparently have already been knocked out or at least disrupted because of solar flares. The space station has to worry about solar flares. But a giant one, like I said, could wipe out power stations on the Earth, wipe out communications, the internet, radar, airplane travel. It would be a mess. We'd be thrown back 100 years.
But are any steps being taken to, if God forbid this happens?
In Congress, there is a bill to pass a paltry $100 million. It's stalled in Congress right now. It's an insurance policy. It would cost very little to begin the process of reinforcing our transformers, power stations. And remember, this does happen even periodically. In 2003 in South Africa, 14 power stations were wiped out because a solar flare hit South Africa. In Canada, the city of Quebec was partially paralyzed, again, about 15 years ago because of a solar flare. These things happen, but the monster one is the one that we physicists are worried about.
5,000 new emergency bomb shelters will be created in Moscow. The city has just given architects the task of coming up with the designs. So let's speak to our correspondent Ivor Bennett to get a few more details on this. Ivor, why do the authorities want these shelters building? That's the big question.
Why? Well, it's because there are only enough shelters at the moment in the city to house and shelter around half the city's population, which, compared to other places in the world, isn't out of the ordinary. That figure is sort of 50% coverage. For example, Switzerland is the only country where there are enough shelters for the entire country's population. But Moscow wants to build another 5,000 shelters.
After 2 years of noisy and disruptive construction, the massive underground building project in front of the White House West Wing is wrapping up. The big green fence that hid it from public view has come down, and crews are tidying up what used to be a huge hole. But after the big dig, the big reveal is, well, a pretty big letdown. The West Wing has emerged essentially unchanged, and what was built deep below remains a pretty big mystery.
Officially, this project is an overdue upgrade of utilities, sewers, electrical lines, that sort of thing. But what those of us who work here saw was tons of steel I-beams going in and truckload after truckload of concrete being poured into this big hole. Whatever was built goes multiple stories deep underground.
Officials running the project deny this is some new bomb shelter. The White House already has one under the East Wing, and it's not more offices. But beyond that, they won't talk details. They've told workers not to talk either, even ordering subcontractors to keep their identities secret. Whatever was built is just the first phase of a sprawling 4-year project.
Governor, I think there's a real serious problem that I think you are the person who can look into. There is something that's going to be happening in the next couple of years. Scientists have reported that there is going to be solar flare activity that's going to be much, much more serious than what we've seen in the past. And this could cause major repercussions for people in this country. There are some actual scientific facts that have been reported by NASA. In about 2 years, the sun is going to go through a very unusual series of solar flares. The radiation that comes out from that solar flare, that electromagnetic energy, is going to hit the Earth. What they're talking about is something major.
How bad do they think this is going to be?
Well, it can be bad enough that our crumbling electric grid could be hit in a major way. Now, we're not talking about a few cities losing power even. We're talking about it could be half the country. It could be more than that.
The whole country? And the government's not concerned about this?
They're not doing anything about it.
Jim Higgins is about to clarify what he means by not doing anything. The government may not be working to fix the grid. But some people within the government are planning to ride out the firestorm.
That could be chaos. Why wouldn't they prepare us?
There are underground bases. FEMA has one in Mount Weather, and that is a big fortress where they can house literally thousands of people for continuity of government.
That means keep the government operating in times of an extreme emergency. Somebody's got to be in charge.
Right. We know that there are dozens and dozens of other bases, reported, known government bases in various locations. Now, who's going to go down into these underground bases? People who are essentially wealthy and powerful.
The private sector.
And the elite.
So a select few will be taken care of, you're saying, and they will be put in these underground places while the rest of us are left to deal with the chaos that goes on up here?
Exactly.